Hello again and welcome back to You Are My Boro, the Northern Echoes Boro helping on your podcast channels, your podcast platforms, or on YouTube if you're watching along there. I'm Dom Short, joined by Scott Wilson, and as promised last week on our first vid, we're going to have a chat about the signings today, our verdict on the 12 summer signings and how they've fared so far. How was your back end of the week travelling then, Scott? We discussed that this time last week, the gig and then the big one. That was poor, by the way, wasn't it, on Friday night?
It was pretty poor on Friday night, wasn't it? Yeah. Gig was good. Yeah, bit of Jamie Webster at the Roundhouse in Camden. Saw ahead the next day, which meant Wembley, watching that rubbish and then driving home through the night wasn't probably ideal. But no, all good. Yeah, England were poor, weren't they? We're recording this on Monday afternoon, so Monday lunchtime rather. So they've got Macedonia tonight. Maybe it'll be a bit better, but I mean, it all feels a bit. We just count down the days of the tournament now from an England point of view, aren't we, really?
I don't have any trips to the capital to tell you about from the back end last week, but I do have a keyboard update. My F has completely crumbled.
Completely gone.
But for those hundreds of thousands of viewers and listeners who have concerned and lost sleep over the last week, I've got another laptop in transit, so fingers crossed.
Yeah. There we go. There we go. It might arrive in about 3 weeks' time. So let's hope
I haven't had
this back in the Boro starting side of the weekend.
Yeah, I haven't had too much Dale Fry to write about over the course of the week. That was good. Just before we start, thanks to those who watched or listened at the back end last week when we had Anthony Vickers on talking about his new Boro book.
I enjoyed it. That got me from about, here we go, service chat. That got me from about Donington to probably Woodall. Donington to Woodall, that little section. That was listening to you and Vic chew the fat.
I don't mind Donington, but the only thing is with it, it's one. If I'm right here, it's one of those. I hate the services. I hate the services where you come off and you've got half a mile of roundabouts and this and that to go. And Donington's one of them, innit?
It's quite a good one when you get there, but it's a chew on. It's definite of all the M1 ones. It's the biggest chew on. Yeah, definitely.
Well, here's one for you on services. You know that new Leeds one?
Yeah. At the top, at the top of the M1. Yeah.
So that's called like a services extra or something.
Right.
But the logo of it looks like like a McDonald's, the McDonald's logo.
Okay.
So I wanted a coffee. I can't remember where I was going or coming back from. I went in there for a coffee. Thought McDonald's cheapest coffee, isn't it?
Yeah.
Went in and I asked. There's a proper anticlimax to this story. I've started now.
Gonna do it.
But I want to see if anyone else has been fooled. So it's not a McDonald's. That's the logo for the services. And I'm like, and the guy said to me, we get people asking on a daily basis. I'm like, change your logo, man.
There you go. Yeah, so instead you got hit by full price Starbucks.
Yeah, £4.50 for a Starbucks or a Costa.
Yeah, bosh.
Anyway,
well, if this isn't getting the viewers in, I don't know what will.
Yeah, if you're still with us after 3.5 minutes, we're going to talk about the summer signings so far. We'll run through each one. We'll be back later this week to have a chat about ahead of the Bristol City game on Saturday. Just before we start, just give us a tap and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and you're not already. And if you're listening on podcasts, give us a rating and leave a review on there as well if you can, because that'll help us no end. 12 signings, Scott. We'll start in goal with the number one and arguably the pick of the signings, Seny Dieng. What have you made of him so far?
I was going to say, I think number one in more than one ways, isn't it, really? It felt like a big one in the summer because Stefan was such a big figure last season, both in terms of his shot stopping, clearly the way that he played out from the back, the way that Carrick wants his Boro side to kind of build possession. But he was also just felt like a big character, didn't he? You know, an on-field presence. And so, at the start of the summer, there was a little bit of, are Boro going to be able to keep him? He obviously then got the injury, had the operation, became pretty clear that he wasn't going to be coming back. So it was right, okay, where did Boro go? Dieng, we pretty much is led to believe was pretty much always their number one. It felt like it was pretty quick in terms of getting the job done, getting him in. It felt like a good bit of business just in terms of getting it done early. But it's proved to be, I think, a really good bit of business. He's been good, hasn't he? Very good. Some key saves. I mean, you think back to that Sunderland win, which in the end, turned out to be a romp. But if Dieng doesn't make that crucial save when it's goalless, that game can be very, very different. And he's made, 4 or 5 of those this season. But then again, like Stefan, just absolutely what Carrick wants in terms of building from the back, comfort on the ball, long passes, short passes. He can do a bit of all of it. And there was 2 or 3 moments in the first couple of games where you thought, is he going to play Boro into trouble here? And to be fair, there were moments like that with Stefan through last season, but neither of them have really done it. And I don't want to jinx it for the next few games, but there haven't really been that. So I think you've got to put a massive tick in the box for Dieng so far, don't you?
There's been, I think, the classic conversation with goalkeepers, isn't it? Is how many points have they won across the season. But even in this last chunk of games, even in the chunk of games that, immediately comes to mind, Leicester, the save from the Vestergaard header at the end of the first half, and then the save to keep out Iheanacho, admittedly, which came after his mistake, but they were both saves that ultimately contributed to Boro winning the game. I think he's the one signing, and this isn't a slight on any of the others, because I think it says more about the players who left and who Boro were trying to replace. But I think he's the one signing where you can make a real case that it was actually an upgrade.
Yeah, and he's one of the few that were, to coin a Boris Johnson phrase, he was oven ready, wasn't he? Like, a number of players that Boro brought in this summer, which we'll get to, feel like at least partly they're with an eye on the future and what might happen further down the line. Dieng wasn't that. And in fairness to Carrick and the rest of the recruitment team at Rockcliffe, I think they realised pretty quickly that it's hard to do that with a goalkeeper. A number 1 goalkeeper has to be ready to go in straight away, not be phased, hit the ground running. And so that inevitably means really you have to get a much more experienced player than you maybe look at further in up the pitch in different positions. So, I think they knew they had to get a keeper who could go in the Championship and do it. Dieng had proved it at QPR, and he's proved it again with Boro. Really good.
And just on how comfortable he is with his feet, we saw it last season. But again, like that Leicester game, for example, I think it makes a world of difference that even when they're kind of under the cosh a little bit, he just will not panic. He's wholly committed and wholly comfortable. And that sets the tone, really, for everything Carrick wants his team to look like and play like, doesn't it? I think it's so important that if the keeper's panicking, then those in front of and there's the knock-on effect. So I think in some cases, there's a real calming presence from him, isn't there?
There is, but also a dominance. He will come for things. When Boro have the ball, he'll quite often be stood either right at the edge or even out of his 18-yard box, which, like you said, then inevitably means the defence doesn't feel like it's got to drop off. Boro can press higher up the pitch. It all feeds into the style and what Carrick's trying to do. He's an important player, isn't he? He's very quickly become a very important player in this Boro team.
And I think, part of the praise you can give him is the fact that he's keeping an international goalkeeper out of the side, because Tom Glover has come in and he's Australian international. He was the first to sign, so it was unclear at the time whether he was very initially coming in as a number 1, but it's clear that he's the deputy and he's playing the cup games. So it's harder to judge him because we haven't seen as much of him. But what have you made of Glover so far?
Yeah, I mean, the cup run's been an interesting one because Boro have let in a lot of goals in that cup run. There's been 3-2s, 3-1s, a couple of 3-2s, hasn't there? So they have let goals in. I struggle really to massively pinpoint them on Glover, though. And obviously in mitigation, certainly in the first 2 rounds of that, it was a pretty makeshift defence, an untried defence, should we say, in those games at Huddersfield Bowl and at Bradford, really. So, hard to judge. I mean, it doesn't look out of place in the team. There's been examples of times when a second-choice goalkeeper's played at Boro or at other clubs when you've looked at them and thought, goodness me, you really wouldn't want to be starting with him every week. if something happened with Dieng and Glover was to have to play for 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever, I don't think Carrick will be massively rattled by that. Now, you know, we haven't quite seen what he would be like in that kind of run of games. We don't know, you know, exactly where he's at in terms of how big a drop off there'd be from Dieng, because I think there would be a drop off. But he's done what's been asked of him so far. I think it'll be. I get the impression that Carrick will keep him in the Carabao Cup, come what may. Quarter-final, semi-final, final, dare we even say. I think Glover starts those games because I think that Carrick, wants him to feel massively part of it and feel that he is valued for the contribution he's making. And obviously, Carrick's played at Man United in an era when that's what they did, and you know, second choice keepers started finals for Manchester United if they'd been in the lineup all the way through. So, listen, let's see. But you know, I could be completely wrong. Maybe Dieng will play against Port Vale, but at the minute, I'll be pretty confident that it will be Glover. Yeah,
I agree. I think it's a trust thing, isn't it? In the kind of what message does it send if you've played this goalkeeper throughout, and then suddenly you get to a semi-final and say, well, actually, you know, now I don't quite trust you enough to play. Yeah.
And it was Arteta earlier this season, wasn't it? He was trying to make the case that, listen, the goalkeeper's just a player like anyone else. Why should it be such a big thing when one of them's dropped and one of them's in and one of them's out? Well, it is different for a goalkeeper. There's no doubt about that. If you change your goalkeeper, you know, with 20 minutes of a game left and he's not injured, you're going to get real questions about what's going on there. It's not the same. So you're right. For Carrick to suddenly decide now, okay, you've done, you know, I've called on you up to this point, but actually I don't fancy you so much now. No, I think that would be the wrong message. So I think we will see Glover.
What'll be interesting is who we're going to see in January and potentially early February, because Seny Dieng is obviously an international for Senegal, who are the defending African Cup of Nations champions. That runs until 13th of January through the 11th of February. And at the same time, the Asian Cup, with Australia part of that, and obviously Tom Glover is international for them, that is the 12th of Jan until the 10th of Feb. There's every chance. It's probable rather than possible that both Dieng and Glover are going to be away for the bulk of January and February. Now, obviously, Zach Hemming, Solbrin and Liam Roberts all went out on loan in the summer. Hemming to St Mirren, Brint to Leyton Orient, Roberts to Barnsley, where he's impressing, but he's recently got injured. Boro brought in Jamie Jones as a third choice keeper in January. It'll be interesting, won't it, Scott? And this is something clearly that Michael Carrick will be asked about in the coming weeks. If they are both away, does Jones come back? Is there a potential loan recall on, you know, is it a possibility that someone like Bryn, for example, comes back at the start of January and then goes back to the club at the end of January if and when it looks like Dieng and Glover are going to be back? It's clearly, I was going to say it's a decision that's going to be made in the coming weeks, but it's not. This, you would think, is something that Boro will have prepared for when they sign both keepers in the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to give a shout to, it's Sean Rye. If Sean's watching, he replied to me on Twitter this morning. We'd obviously done a bit on Carrick talking about Dieng, and he flagged this up and said, do you know what the situation is? And the simple answer is, at the moment, we don't. Carrick's not really been put on the spot about this as yet. But obviously, you know, we're getting an awful lot nearer now. So it's going to be something that will be talked about and discussed at pressers in the next couple of weeks, I would think. And it's going to be interesting because... Jones is there. Feels at the moment like it would be a big probably call to put him in for a month. But then again, you know, it would probably be an equally big call to bring either Roberts back or Bryn back or Hemming back, wouldn't it?
Because Jones, you know, he was club captain at Wigan. He played for them.
Yeah, but by the same token, it doesn't make any sense, really, to go and spend money signing a goalkeeper in January when come February he's going to be the third choice. So if you're saying it now, I think Jones probably starts. But that does feel like a bit of a risk. And that's probably a bit unfair because we've seen little or nothing of Jones in a competitive environment in a Boro shirt. So it probably feels a bit unfair on him to say, well, it feels a risk, but it does, I think. Because it's going to come at a pivotal stage of the season, isn't it? Crucial league games in January. Certainly edging towards February. I've got to get the dates right in my head here, but I would think at least one leg of a Carabao Cup semi-final potentially if Boro have got there. So, you know, a big spell, and yet to lose both of your keepers is clearly not ideal, but it's looking like something Boro are probably going to have to deal with.
I think the one advantage of, well, not one, but one advantage of going with Jones rather than bringing back one of the other keepers is Jones has spent the first half of the season in and around the squad, travelling with them home and away, seeing what Carrick wants from his keepers, and working with Alan Fentis, the goalkeeping coach, every day. So that's one we'll discuss. We'll speak to Michael Carrick about that at a press conference in the next few weeks and discuss that. Rav van den Berg, Carrick loves him, doesn't he?
Yeah, and has done from day one, really. I mean, you know, listen, Michael Carrick, because of the kind of guy he is and because of the way he manages, he's been, you know, pretty universally positive about all the signings. Let's be brutally honest when he's talked about them. He's not a manager who's ever going to criticise his players. But even within that, it's still possible to get the glint in the eye and get a real understanding of when he really does kind of get excited and fancy a player. And it was pretty early on, obvious early on with Van den Berg that he, you know, he rates him both as a player and a character, which I think is interesting given how young he is. Now, you know, when he came in, there was talk of Milan, Dortmund, all kinds of clubs. And speaking to people in and around the club, I know Boro had to work very, very hard to get him. A lot of time spent talking to him and his agent and kind of explaining why playing, you know, regular football, or at least having a chance of playing regular football with Boro was probably a better bet from him than going to Milan and not getting near the first team or whatever. And it's worked out like that, hasn't it? You know, he's played pretty much right across the back line. And we've talked about this on a previous vid. I think he will be a centre-half eventually. But at the moment, he seems to be Carrick's first choice at right back with Tommy Smith being out. And you know, he's shown himself more than capable of performing that role, even though he's probably, well, he is, isn't he? He's a much more defensive-orientated option at right back than Dijksteel or switching Isaiah Jones back there or the other kind of things you could shuffle around and do. But he doesn't look bad going forward, does he? It's not like he looks like a defender who can't do that. It's just he looks a defender. And I think in time he will be a centre-half. But Boro have got to be pleased with the way he's developed so far, I think.
I think the second half at Sheffield Wednesday, after Lukas Engel's tough first half, when Van den Berg went over to left back.
The left back, yeah.
You know, this is a centre-half who hadn't played much at right back on his more comfortable natural side. He'd never played at left back. And yet, for Carrick to trust that he could do it, I think he'll have been 18 at the time, to put an 18-year-old in that situation tells you everything. What I think would have been interesting is Carrick's never had this season all of his defenders fully fit. So if everyone's fully fit now, what's your back four? Engel, you probably say is left back. Fry, Lenihan, Van den Berg, Smith. I don't know, but just on what we've seen, and like you say there, Carrick's reaction, my feeling is Van den Berg would be in there.
It'd be in it. I think
ahead of Smith, possibly ahead of Smith.
Yeah, I mean, I think
because I think Carrick is pretty set.
I think up until this point, Carrick has really valued Smith's experience and leadership, and felt that with a predominantly young side, he offered an awful lot there. So I think had Smith stayed fit, I think Carrick would have been loath to have left him out again. But having said that, you know, he clearly likes Van den Berg. It will be, if Smith had been fit, it'd be interesting if we were having this conversation and saying that Van den Berg was being lined up to come in at centre half, you know, ahead of a Fry, a McNair or a Lenihan at some stage. At the moment, it doesn't really feel like that, but that's because he's needed him at right back, and he's now viewing him as a right back at the moment.
For now, yeah.
I suspect if Smith hadn't got injured, Van den Berg would have been knocking on the door at centre half as opposed to slotting in at right back. I could be wrong, but that would be my reading on it.
Yeah, with Lenihan out at the minute, there'd have potentially been a McNair or Van den Berg decision there alongside Fry. Yeah. On the other side, let's talk about Lukas Engel, because first things first, fair play to the character of the
Yeah.
lad, because to come in and have to step into the shoes of Ryan Giles, who was really probably the Championship's best left back. Like I know,
Yeah.
you know, you probably are in this day and age judging left backs on assists and everything you offer going forward as much as what you do at the back. But Giles was probably the left back that you'd have wanted more than any other.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Defender in that position last season, especially in Carrick's side. So that was difficult enough as it in isolation. Then he comes into a side that had a tough start to the season. A couple of early mistakes, that West Brom one. Then he has that nightmare at Sheffield Wednesday. And I mean, we're having the conversation then. Well, when will we next see Lukas?
Lukas Engel,
Fair play to him for how he's recovered and his performances since.
No, absolutely. It was the Southampton game, the first one back, wasn't it?
When he came
that was the first one. Let me just double check. Let me get this right. No, Southampton was the one that he missed. Cardiff at home was the first one back. And I remember when he came into that side, I did that game at the Riverside, and you were thinking, will he kind of just play a real safety first game? Will he be reluctant to kind of do anything? And within the first 10 minutes, like you say, fair play to him, he was getting the ball, he was bombing up the wing. He put two or three really good crosses in, and from, if nothing else there, you thought, well, okay, you've got a bit of character about you. You know, fair play. You've stepped up here. You haven't hidden away. You've tried to get on the ball. The crowd were kind of willing, and it was that game. Can you remember
that game when
he wasn't getting the ball? Yeah, it felt like nobody, and the crowd were almost yelling for the rest of the Boro team to give him the ball. And then in the second half, I think he set up one of the goals. I think he got an assist, but he really came into the game. And then from that point onwards, he's just kind of gone on and on and on, really, hasn't he? He's got stronger and stronger. And now he looks justifiably Boro's absolute nailed on first pick at left back, and a player who can defend, but can also get forward and start to do at least a bit of what Giles was doing last season. I mean, listen, all the soundings when he came were that Boro thought that they'd got a really good deal and a player who could go straight in and make an impact and do it. And obviously, those first couple of games, you look at it and thinking, oh, how can they get that so wrong? Now, increasingly, Engel is looking like the player Boro always felt and hoped and kind of knew that they'd signed. So, you know, he's got to keep it going. And we'll get to Bangura in a minute. He's going to be, you know, pushing him and asking questions of him. But at the minute, I don't think there's any doubt that when Carrick's picking the team for that first game back next weekend at Bristol City, all things, you know, unless there's a problem we don't know about, Engel will start and there'll be no eyebrows kind of raised because he is now Boro's first choice left back.
He got an assist in that Cardiff game, which I thought was hugely important for him. But then the game after that, Sunderland away in that atmosphere, it would have been easy to shrink in that. And I was kind of a bit fearful for him, really, going into that. And yet, you know, he absolutely stood up to the challenge there. I think back to the season when Woodgate was in charge and Boro lost heavily at Leeds and Mark Bowler played left back and Bowler was just new to the Championship. And he really struggled that day. And it just looked like everything was too much for him.
Yeah.
Weird that might be the case with Engel going to Sunderland, but he got through that, kicked on. And I think you can see, and I know from speaking to people around the club that he, you know, he's coming out of himself now. There's the confidence there, which is great to see because, back to where we started, I just think it's such a great show of character because it would have been easily for the
absolutely. And you know,
that first half of Sheffield Wednesday was as bad an individual performance as I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, and you know, a bit of a cliche, but coming through that, you would think will do an awful lot of good in the long, just in his career in general, because you know, like you say, a massive adversity there would have been very, very easy for him to have gone under and kind of disappeared without trace and, you know, loaned back to Denmark in January or next summer and kind of becomes a footnote in Boro's history. Well, no, you know, he's shown he's a bigger character than that. He's trusted himself. The ability's there. So yeah, let's see how he kicks on from here. But no, you know, he's had a really good month, hasn't he? You'd certainly say that.
And Alex Bangura, desperately unfortunate, really, because he got injured in his debut at Blackburn. And had he not got injured, had he stayed fit in that period of time when Engel was.
Well, we've been having a very different Engel conversation, mightn't we, if Bangura had stayed fit? Yeah,
absolutely. And since then we clearly haven't seen loads of him. But you were at Exeter when he played there. What were your thoughts? What are your kind of
he looks a more naturally attacking fullback option than Engel. Certainly his best moments in that Exeter game were getting the ball forward, driving on, getting crosses into the box. And he looked really good at that, very athletic. Now, Exeter's first goal it was a screamer, in fairness. The lad pops an absolute cracker in, but all the build-up play came from that side of the pitch and kind of in Bangura's position. And it's very limited evidence, but my gut reaction with him is that he could well turn out to be a better fullback going forward than he is going backwards. And in fairness, I think that's the kind of player that he's being touted as. So, I think that will probably turn out to be true. But at the moment, it's very limited evidence we're going on, isn't it? I mean, that'll be, we keep on saying about this in the Cup. That'll be another interesting one to see whether he plays at Port Vale or whether it's Engel.
Again, I suspect it'll be Bangura. I think Carrick will largely stick with the same.
Yeah, I think he will with the way the draw has panned out. It's a massive opportunity, but it is a game against Port Vale. You know what I mean? Had they drawn
Port Vale in the second round, out in the quarters,
then it might have been different. Yeah.
Desperately unfortunate, Lewis O'Brien, because he was looking like a fine summer signing, wasn't he? For a lot of the players we've talked about were unknown quantities really when they came in. Glover, Vandenberg, Engel, Bangura, all in the Championship. Lewis O'Brien was anything but. He was probably the standout player in the Championship a couple of seasons ago when Huddersfield came so close. Went to Nottingham Forest for big money. Could have got various other moves. I remember reading about Leeds being interested in him again and again and again. The Forest move obviously didn't go to plan. And I was over at Rockcliffe when he was there for his unveiling, and he talked about how hungry he was to kind of prove a point, really, and to get back on track. And he looked to be doing that, be it at left back for a couple of games. But he'd also played in midfield. And we'd seen flashes of, why Boro was so pleased to get him. And then obviously he gets that injury at Watford. And I saw, funnily enough, I was coming out of Rockcliffe a couple of weeks ago, and he went through and he was having a chat with a couple of the staff and seemed in good spirits. And he said he was getting his pot off, I think, later that week. It's obviously too early to say when he might be back. But Boro were absolutely clear, when he does come back from his injury, he'll still be here on loan. There'll be no returning to Forest. Hopefully, Boro can still see the best of him in the last few months of the season.
It feels like another kind of what if thing, isn't it? Really, because there's a scenario where if O'Brien hadn't got injured, he'd still now be Boro's number one left back, and we'd be talking about neither Engel nor Bangura haven't got a chance, because while it was a square peg in a round hole, it was a square peg in a round hole that was filling it really nicely in the games that he played there. He didn't look out of out of his depth or in the wrong role. Now, maybe in time he would have gravitated back towards central midfield, and maybe he would have, maybe we'd be talking about, is Johnny House going to be able to get back into this team if O'Brien had really been given a chance to show what he can do in midfield? I just have a little bit of a feeling that if he had 4 or 5 really good performances at left back, Carrick might not have moved him away from there. We might be talking about him being at left back for a big chunk of the season. Just on a personal level, it's a real shame for him, because, like you say, his career hasn't gone to plan in the last 2 or 3 years, and this was a real chance for him to get back, establish himself in a club that was, hopefully going to be battling for promotion. And listen, he could still do that. You're right. The soundings are maybe the start of the year for him. Well, that's still giving him 3 or 4 months of pretty solid football to try and make a success of this loan move. But it's going to be that much harder now, isn't it? Because Howson's shown he's still pretty much as good as ever. Hayden Hackney struggled to see how Michael Carrick's going to be leaving him out the side. Barlaser, when he's been called on in the last month and a half, looks a better player now probably than last season. So, you know, where Lewis O'Brien fits into the jigsaw when he's fit, we'll have to wait and see. There will be chances for him. Inevitably there will be. But you do wonder if this is just going to be a loan move that come the end of it, it's like, well, it just didn't really work out the way that anyone wanted because he missed such a big part of it.
Yeah, I really hope. I think because there's Barlaser to consider there as well. But I think just from what Carrick said about him and what we saw in the early weeks, that when he's fit again, Carrick will take every opportunity to get him back in. Like how and where, it's not clear, is it, at this stage? No. We don't know how it's going to look at the end of the season. And the other thing, you know, you never profess to know a footballer from 2 or 3 conversations with him, especially when, you know, post-match interviews or whatever, and you're getting 2 minutes. Yeah. But just from the brief interactions I've had with him, he strikes me as a really good character, really sound, humble, down-to-earth fella who just wanted to come and play his football again and start enjoying football again. So on a personal level, I was gutted for him. You said there about fitting. Where does he fit in the jigsaw? Alex Gilbert hasn't so far this season, and yet he is a player who signed from Brentford B, has played next to no first-team football. He was, of all of the signings, one of those who you looked at and thought, well, maybe it's a bigger picture, longer-term signing, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's more than fair. I was at it was the Bradford Cup game, wasn't it, where he came on? Yeah. But I mean, that was only for 15, 20 minutes probably. And he sorry, this is just someone trying to call me. Here we go. Fourth mid podcast.
Lewis O'Brien, he's heard that you
that I'm writing off his loan move. Yeah, exactly. So Gilbert, I mean, he came on there. It was the first kind of look at him. I mean, Carrick said that he wanted to get him on. He wanted to get him involved, and he'd earned the right to do that. But he does feel a fair way away from being a regular kind of presence at the moment. Now, like you say, that's not necessarily a slight on him, given A, his age, and B, his lack of senior experience before he came in. So, you know, there were always going to be a couple that of the summer signings that took longer, and the chances were just going to be limited because clearly Carrick can't play everybody. It'll be interesting to see if in a year's time where Alex Gilbert is fitting in the picture and whether he has made that breakthrough, or I mean, are we talking second half of the season loan maybe?
It strikes me as the type where you look at and think it makes sense.
It feels like, well, if he's not going to get any nearer to any more regular game time with Boro in the second half of the season, then might he not benefit from 3 or 4 months playing regular football in League One, even League Two? If nothing else, I think we'd get a much better idea then of where he's at in terms of his readiness for Championship football. Because, you know, Josh on loan at Bristol Rovers last year, yeah, there were ups and downs in that loan move, but it was pretty apparent right from the word go that he was ready for League One / already too good for League One. So that shows you that he's, pretty much ready to go and have a go in the Championship. Well, is Gilbert at that level? We don't really know. But if he went to Bristol Rovers for the second half of the season, we'd get a pretty good idea at least of where he's at in terms of Championship, League One, senior football, where he's at. I think he'd probably benefit from that, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's interesting because you move on to the next one, Sammy Silvera. Silvera's only 23, but he's not all that experienced, really. The bulk of his football, other than one stint away, had been in Australia. And when you watch him, he's clearly raw and it's clearly a work in progress with him. And he looks more of a cameo impact player at the minute, doesn't he? And yet there are only 4 league games in which he hasn't played some point. Now, 1 or 2 of those have been kind of last-minute substitute appearances. But I think the signs on the whole for a player who, again, you probably bring in and think, well, we're not expecting him to completely hit the ground running. I think the signs on the whole a positive with Silvera?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think he's undoubtedly got something there. You know, natural talent, dribbling ability, running at players, final product in terms of shots and crosses. There's an awful lot to like there. I mean, I thought he was the best of the Boro summer signings in pre-season. Now, pre-season's pre-season, doesn't tell you an awful lot, but you definitely saw glimpses there. He hasn't done it necessarily in a full 90 minutes yet, although his opportunities to do that have been limited. Although what I would say is, along with Rodgers, who we're going to get to in a minute, but probably Silvera even more so, he was the player who turned it around at Exeter. He really did take the game by the scruff of the neck at the start of that second half and got Boro on the front foot, obviously got his goal. He was massive in that game. You know, could he do the same and run a championship game for 20, 30 minutes? Maybe not. Maybe he's not quite there yet. But there's definite ability there. And I think what Carrick will really like, and fully enough, I'm just halfway through kind of writing a bit on this and it'll probably be, it'll be online in the morning in tomorrow's paper, but Carrick kind of just praising the impact that his subs have made. I mean, in 3 of Boro's last 6 league games, a substitute has scored. I think 8 times this season in all competitions, a substitute has scored for Boro. Silvera and again Rodgers, who we're going to get to, have been a really big part in that. When he's been called upon to come off the bench, he has made an impact in most of his appearances. And if nothing else, that shows that he's switched on and he's wanting to prove himself. And he's not sulking about not being in the team. He knows where he's at in the kind of development of his career. And his attitude's clearly spot on and the abilities there. So, it might take a little bit of time and it'll be interesting to see if he does get more championship game time in the second half of the season. I think there's probably a chance that he might. But I think from where Boro got him from and the age and the profile that he has, I think they'll be happy with his development rate so far.
You touched on Rodgers there. It feels harsh to have judged Rodgers on the early weeks of the season when he was playing up front, because he's clearly not a centre forward. He can play there, yeah, but he's not a natural striker, and we saw that. But in this recent chunk of games, I think there's been some really promising flashes from him, and really, it's probably only the excellence of Greenwood in recent weeks, which we'll get to, that has kept him out, because he came on and scored the winner against Birmingham. You touched on it at Exeter there, his performance there. That was the type of performance you want to see from someone who's getting a chance in a cup game, don't you? Kind of, right, show me why you should be in the team. Again, he's one of those where it's clearly been brought in with the bigger picture in mind. Now, that's not to say that this season's a write-off. If you can get the best out of him straight away, then you do that. But he's clearly not kind of, all the eggs aren't thrown into the basket of we need him to perform this season. Yeah. I think he's definitely heading in the right direction. The performance is definitely in the right direction. You can see why Boro signed him.
I think you made a good point right at the start there, which is had Boro not been short of a striker at the start of the season, I think we'll be having exactly the same conversation about Rodgers as we just had with Silvera, which is that there's really positive signs there. He's made an impact in games recently, largely coming off the bench, but then again, that Exeter game, he definitely helped Boro win that in the second half. There's a lot of natural ability there. He looks comfortable with the ball at his feet. He can link play. Again, he's got a shot on him. What he isn't at the minute is a regular starting striker in the Championship. And unfortunately, like you said, that's what he was asked to be in those first 3 or 4 weeks of the season when Boro didn't really have other options there. Or at least Carrick didn't want to use those other options. He hadn't turned to Coburn at that point, had he? So, I think with Rodgers, it's coloured a little bit by those first few performances. But I think if you take them out of it, like you say, then he's ticking along quite nicely, and he's showing signs that he definitely could be a really effective number 10 or a wide attacker in the Championship, which is where he needs to be used, not as a number 9.
And Sam Greenwood, when he came in, told us he can play various positions across the front line. He's played on the left in the absence of McGree. And 2 things on Greenwood. A, he's made himself, at the minute, one of the first names on the team sheet, hasn't he? He is. And, how many times have we said at the start of the season when you went back to those early weeks and it was hard to predict what team Carrick was going to name. Well, now you know that Greenwood is going to be in that starting 11 at Bristol City on Saturday. And the other thing, we've said this on a number of occasions, that £1.5 million looking like a snip in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Greenwood's an interesting one because whereas Rodgers started the season when you maybe didn't expect him to, Greenwood took a fair little while to get a chance to start again, wasn't it? I mean, I'm just looking here. His first start wasn't until Cardiff at the start of October. So, you know, Greenwood did come with, all right, not shed loads of experience, but, you know, he had the pedigree from Sunderland. He'd had the move to Arsenal. He'd been at Leeds. He'd played championship football. And when in those early weeks he wasn't getting in the starting team, you did wonder a little bit, well, okay, that's interesting. You know, does Carrick maybe not fancy him? Has he not settled maybe in the way that they thought? Well, all of that's out the window now. Forget all of that. You know, clearly Michael Carrick just felt it was right to bide the time. Since he's come in, Greenwood's been a revelation, really. You know, just confidence, taking the game by a scruff of the neck, trying to make things happen. The goals, I mean, obviously the last-minute free kicks, an unbelievable screamer, but to handle the whole experience of going to the Stadium of Light with the background that he has and the fact, you know, he'd started his career there and everything like that, to deliver the performance and obviously get the goal there that he did speaks volumes for him, I think. And it says everything that, you know, the conversation we were having in the last vid, does Riley McGree get back into this Boro team when he's fit? Well, if you've been having that conversation for most of last season or the early part of this season, there would have been no conversation to be had. Now there is a massive conversation to be had because I don't think it's inevitable that McGree gets in ahead of Greenwood in any way, space or form. So that says an awful lot, I think, for the strides that Greenwood's made over the last month or so.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like when McGree's fit again, it's not a case of is Greenwood dropped. That feels like a given at the minute. I know things can change clearly if the form can fluctuate, but at the minute it would feel like a question of, does McGree go straight back in? If he does Crooks drop out and Greenwood go to 10? Feels like Greenwood would stay in the team.
Yeah.
And it's a case of whether it's Crooks or McGree who
and we've not really seen him as a 10, have we? And he looks to have all the attributes that you'd want to play there. I mean, you know, he's great on the ball. He can thread a pass through. He's got a shot on him. He's creative. But he also works. You know, he'll put a shift in. He'll drop back if needed, if Boro are under the cosh. So that might well be the way things pan out. McGree ends up back on the left and Greenwood goes in as a 10. And I think he could definitely do a job there. And like you say, you know, 1.5 million for a permanent signing is remarkable business, really, for a player of that caliber.
And it feels like it just works. He's a player who, at 21-year-old, is ready to settle now and really nail down the players rather than be a kind of, you know, getting the odd chance here and there. He's back in the northeast where he clearly, you know, where he grew up and his family and friends here. It just feels like at the minute it all works. And
he's won as well. And I know we're getting way ahead of ourselves here. So I almost apologise for saying it. But if Boro were to get promoted, he's a player you'd look at and think, well, in the Premier League, he could be anything. Yeah. He could develop into anything. You know, he could be a top Premier League player in 5 or 6 years' time, whether with Boro or without it. You know, now, you know, clearly there are players within the Boro squad just because of the level that they're at or their age or whatever, that just realistically that's not going to be the case with. But Greenwood, you will be really excited about in terms of future potential. You know, I think as far as Boro go, Greenwood can go with them.
And finally, Emmanuel Latte-Lath came in, started the season really as first choice, but I think it's more what Josh Coburn has done well rather than what Latte-Lath didn't do well or did badly when he was in the team. Coburn really in recent weeks has you know, even though he hasn't scored a load of goals, as he said, he was, thank Michael Carrick for keeping him in there. Latte-Lath just looked a bit raw, didn't he? Just looked not quite ready. Just looked like he will be a work in progress. And I think he's best suited as things stand, as an impact player, as the type of centre forward who you're bringing off the bench in the late stages.
Yeah, I would agree. Or I would say that to me, he looks what he doesn't look like is a striker who's ready to play as a sole number 9 without anybody else playing around him, because that's what when he was starting games really he was being asked to do. And his pace is superb. You know, he will dart in behind. He's got a good touch. Yes, there's issues about his conversion of chances. You know, he has missed some big chances, but he's also scored some goals. What I don't think he can do at the minute is what Coburn does, and that's tie up centre-halves for 60 or 70 minutes.
Bring others in.
Make sure they know they're in a game, pull them around, create pockets of space for a Crooks to dart into, a Greenwood to dart into, a Rodgers to go into if he's playing. That's what you get from Josh, as well as goals and an aerial threat in the box and all of that. I don't think that Lath is that, and I'm not sure he's ever going to be that, to be honest. So I think if he's going to start games, then Boro have to set up a little bit differently than they are at the minute, where Josh Coburn is there as the central focal point. You can play off him, you can play around him if you need to, but he's also going to make runs in behind it and offer you that goal-scoring threat in the 18-yard box. Lath can do some of that, and you know, there's aspects of his game that already are probably superior to those aspects of Coburn. So, you know, darting in behind the opposition defender, playing off the shoulder of the last man, all of that, he's probably better at already than Coburn. But there are elements of his game that you're not going to get if you play him as a natural number 9. So that's why at the moment, I think, yeah, he's definitely better as an impact sub coming in against tired defences when Boro are either chasing the game or trying to score a second goal to put it out of sight, as we saw in the game that he did that in. Cardiff?
I'd have to double check. I can't remember.
Yes, it was Cardiff, wasn't it? Came on with 6 minutes left, got the goal.
Oh, yeah, of course. I remember it now.
So you know, that's where I think Lath is at. But I think if Boro are going to think about starting with him for a prolonged period of time, then they're going to have to set up differently to the way that they're setting up at the minute, will be my view of it. But there's definite talent there.
I was pleased to see him step up and take the penalty at Exeter, because that was a big penalty in a big moment. And sorry, no, Bradford. No, was Exeter? Sorry, Exeter. Yeah, I was down myself.
Exeter, yeah.
He scored the winner at Exeter. Yeah, I was down myself for a split second. Because that was a big penalty in a big moment. And you want your centre forwards front and centre in that type of scenario, I think. Centre forwards are ultimately always judged on goals, no matter what else to bring you. So it was pleasing, I think, that he stepped forward and took that. And he scored at Bradford, didn't he? He's got a couple of goals.
He did. Bradford, he went through and kind of snuck it past the keeper. You're right with Exeter, because there was plenty of players on that pitch who could have taken that penalty. I mean, to be fair, you were nearly at penalty, so we were already kind of, myself and the other lads in the press box, mentally going through who on this pitch is likely to be going to have one or not, and there were plenty of them there that could have taken that penalty. But like you say, fair play to him, load a bottle right in front of that open terrace of Boro fans, popped it in, celebrated in front of them, won the game. That'll have done him the world of good. And yeah, you know, there's a lot there to work with.
Brilliant. Well, let us know what you think. Let us know if you agree, disagree. Let us know your verdict on the signings so far and who you think has been the pick of the bunch so far.
What we need, you've said that there. What we need is to devise some kind of game show where it's agree, disagree, or Riley McGree.
There's our thinking for the next one.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone more creative than us
will be able to come up with something. That's what we want. Agree, disagree, Riley McGree.
Riley McGree. Yeah, so do you agree, disagree, or Riley McGree with Scott? Let us know and give us your thoughts in the comments. And we'll be back at the end of the week, looking ahead to the Bristol City game as Boro get back into action. Michael Carrick will be speaking to the press on Thursday, so we'll be there, and then we'll have a chinwag afterwards, and we'll reflect on that and look ahead to the game. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, enjoy your week, and we'll speak again at the back end of the week.